Hi there, in this video I'm going to teach you the swimming level 1 from the modified clinical Pilates repertoire. This is another exercise pitched at a beginner level or those beginning their rehab. If you have been told that you suffer from chronic low back pain, you need to work on your core strength from a very fundamental level, or if you're recovering from surgery or injury, or perhaps if you're a little bit further on in the postnatal recovery, then this might be an exercise which is well suited for you. It's not meant to be a physically demanding exercise, hence why it's pitched at that level, but it is performed lying on your front. Now, that might not be appropriate for everyone, so if that's a position which you can't get into for whatever reason, then this may be one which you just have to leave out until a later time, or modify into a 4-point kneeling hands and knees technique, which I'll describe in another video. When you're lying on your front, even if it's something you can get into, that position, it often leads to people feeling quite tight and tense in their low back. So it's very common that people will need a pillow or a little rolled up towel to place underneath their low stomach, and I'll go through that when we get into the tutorial. Remember that when performing exercise like this, it should never ever be uncomfortable or painful or bringing on symptoms which you might have had. So if you get that sort of thing, it's best to stop, take a break, and then seek advice from an exercise professional or your instructor. That said, we'll get on with this level 1 of the modified swimming Pilates mat work exercise, and so I'll see you down lying on your front in just a moment. Now, when you're down on the mat, the first thing you want to try and ascertain is whether you're comfortable lying there. I've got my head up at the moment, that's just so I'm talking to camera. What I'd recommend is that you use your hands as a little head cushion. You place one palm on top of another, and then you can rest your head lightly on the top hand. Now, if there's any shoulder issues which are preventing you being in that position for a sustained period, then simply place your arms down by your side. You may be able to rest your head straight onto the mat or floor, but a lot of times people will need a little head cushion as an alternative. The next thing, which is of probably the most importance, is how your low back feels at this stage. A lot of people, just the act of lying on their front, particularly if they've had an injury history or they're recovering from injury or something like that, will feel quite uncomfortable as the lumbar spine gets compressed down towards the floor. If this is happening to you, I think getting some sort of cushioning to place underneath your lower stomach, which will take the lumbar spine from that slightly sunk position into perhaps a more neutral position or a decompressed position. It can be the kind of linchpin for some people and will allow them to perform these exercises. And similarly, if you notice that your low back tightens as you perform this exercise, it may very well be that that's a technique or a modification which is good for you at this stage. As I said in the introduction, you don't ever want that low back beginning to feel like it's really tightening. If you do, just bear those previous points in mind. So from the start position, we hopefully land in a position which is not too far away from neutral in that lumbar spine and pelvic alignment. If you need the cushion, then that maybe has just tilted you slightly away from that. But when you're lying in this prone position for mat work exercises, we want to try and get a lightness over that belt line area where the transversus abdominis muscle wraps around that lower stomach. So you can use your basic core activations here to try and lift that lower belt line area away from the floor. Now, you don't want to accompany that with a pronounced tucking of the tailbone and a flattening forcefully of the back. It's quite a subtle movement when you get that core activation, and you can combine that with a pelvic floor facilitation if you find that's helpful in your core activation. Now, the last thing in terms of comfort, a lot of people will have problems in and around their toes. So if you are prone to cramping up in your feet, then perhaps having the toes tucked underneath is a better start position for you. We're actually going to use that as the start position for a modification in the moment anyway. It may be that you have to stay that way all the time. If the toes are just not happy and your feet are cramping up and you don't like putting pressure on the big toe joint, then get a rolled up towel or a foam roller and just place it underneath your ankles so that you're resting those ankles on something to take the strain of the toes.
Last thing I would say before we begin is it's very tempting, particularly if you've got your hands in the position I have, for those shoulders to wrap up and push up towards your ears. So just try and gently pull the shoulder blades and elbows down towards your feet to decompress when we get started. Now, whatever setup you found is good, then try and keep that and try and keep it neutral, particularly in the head and neck. Obviously, I'm going to have my head turning around substantially during this, but you should try and keep your head in its comfortable position for the entirety of your exercise. Now, the swimming level 1, a really nice entry level for this is to begin this process of dissociating the movement of the legs. So if I just demonstrate the swimming level 1 to begin with, it involves a leg lift alternating from side to side, which looks, and indeed is quite a simple movement, but there's quite a lot which can go wrong if you're new to this type of approach. So what I'd recommend is tucking your toes underneath or rested on a roller, and you want to really focus on when you're keeping that lightness, that lift in the lower stomach as you perform this movement. Take a breath in to prepare, and then breathe out to squeeze one knee off the floor, keeping the toes in contact until you've got a nice feeling of tension in the front of your quads. That's the muscles on the front of your thigh. And then you lower back down. We'll do the same with the other side. Exhaling as you squeeze and push that heel slightly back. Inhaling as you lower. Now this just begins to dissociate movements of the legs from your neutral lumbo-pelvic alignment. So here a lot of people will find that their pelvis rolls side to side, or that their back starts arching or compressing to the floor, or their stomach feels like it's bearing down into the mat. So as you're doing this very simple pattern, make sure nothing is changing in that neutral alignment in your low back and pelvis. We can add in the missing link. From your squeeze straightened position, now reach the toes of that straightened leg to the wall behind you. And then replace and lower down. So a two-part movement. Squeezing the knee, stretching and pointing the ankle, and then replacing and down. Now you can start off quite deliberate in this. Squeezing, pointing, retucking the toes and lowering down. One final time I'm going to demonstrate this, and making sure that you don't feel any of that pressure going down into the floor at this stage as you lose control of those deeper core muscles. So that's a really nice breakdown of what becomes the final swimming movement. I'll demonstrate that with feet flat, which is the kind of classical position to do this from. Shoulders relaxed, drawn down towards your tailbone. Always tell yourself to set that core band, that lower stomach lightened away from the floor, and then you're good to go. Take a breath in and breathe out to reach one leg to the wall behind you, and then inhale to lower. Repeat on the other side, exhaling as you reach, inhaling as you lower back down. Now the reason I'm saying to reach as you perform this is I think it's quite counterproductive to think about lifting the leg. A lot of people perform this exercise, and as they do so, they're trying to get their leg too high, their low back compresses and arches, they get that feeling of uncomfortable tension, often the knee bends as well, and you find you've kind of missed the mark completely for what you're trying to achieve with this. So as you stretch and reach that leg out away from your head, you will of course be getting elevation of your leg, but the higher you lift, the more chance there is that the pull of the tight muscles in the front of the leg will rotate that pelvis forwards and simultaneously arch your back. So this is why this is a low-level exercise. You're only reaching and lifting that leg as high as you can while maintaining that neutral spinal position and critically that feeling of lightness in the lower stomach. The moment that pelvis rotates forwards and arches the back, the stomach gets pressed down and it lets you know that you've gone too far. So this is the swimming level 1, modified. And remember, you can do this in any of those start positions with arms under head or by your side. But the thing I would probably finish up by recommending is that, as well as making sure that you don't feel tension creeping in the back, that you don't notice your pelvis lifting from side to side as you switch legs. You want to do these leg movements wholly independently of that beautifully maintained lumbo-pelvic position.
And that essentially concludes the tutorial for the swimming level 1. Whenever people get exercising on their front, I found in my clinical experience that they're much more susceptible to getting that tension creeping in the low back more quickly than perhaps other exercise positions. So that's why I talked through some of those modifications. Now, if you find that one pillow is just not enough, then get 1 or 2 or 2.5, 3, whatever it is, fold it over, whatever permutations you need. You can use a relatively high amount of stacking so that your legs will kind of stay in a flexed position from your hips and will never really get up above a neutral position, which will probably save a lot of the tension in that lumbar spine region. The really important thing when you're performing these exercises, particularly if you're new to them, is that, as I've said earlier in the video, you don't want to get that encroachment of that creeping back tightness. If you find that's happening, you just stop early and then you reassess, and you can keep that amount that you've done before you reach tightness or discomfort as the minimum amount. And you'd hope that with consistent conditioning of those muscles and the techniques involved, that gradually the time you're able to perform the exercise before the onset of that tightness increases, and then you'll be able to move on to different levels and more advanced techniques. The beginner mat work repertoire shouldn't feel physically demanding. I know I mentioned that earlier on, but it's quite important to bear that in mind, and you want to think about those key concepts of that basic core activation going all the way through, keeping that stomach and navel area, that belt line area light on the mat throughout your allotted exercise time, and to make sure that it's not accompanied with any onset of symptoms. So I know I've been a little bit repetitive on some of the points there, but I think they're points which often get missed when performing or teaching this particular exercise. And if you can get those finer points, those really kind of smart moves sorted early when you're learning this type of thing, then it is of enormous benefit when it goes on to the more difficult techniques. And you're fulfilling those cardinal rules of core strengthening. Make sure you can do A before you even think about moving on to B. Otherwise, your body just follows the path of least resistance each time, and you continue picking up or cementing those bad habits which we're trying to get rid of. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that video. As with all, repetition and practice counts, so good luck with that. Any questions, feel free to leave a comment, or if you do have any adverse effects or you just find it's not one for you, get the advice of your instructor or your medical professional, and never be afraid to ask to modify technique. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video.